Great. Yeah, it should say recording. So.
Yep. I see that.
Hey, Shannon, how are you?
Hey, Ryan. I'm good. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm going to try to get started off as soon as we can. Yeah, because I know we're going to have some time. So how I was thinking I was going to break it up would be I'd probably have you go first, Shannon, and then Sharmila from BLM, and then Melanie from EPA, and then Richard. But what I was going to do was allow like 5 minutes for questions in between each presentation to kind of keep it a little bit more engaging. So.
Sounds good.
All right.
Yeah, and Ryan, just as I said in my email, there are BIL funds and they have been used towards fish passage and fish conservation, number of different things, but our way of doing things are a little different than the other folks. So
Yes.
I'm not sure
Yep.
how the partnerships are going to take it. But I do think there are opportunities for the partnerships to engage in those efforts.
Mm-hmm.
They just won't be as we will not have a grant program where they can apply for funds directly, say with you guys, Shannon, that you guys have. It's just the nature of the beast. So,
Richard, do you know if any of the FHPs are connected with the Urban Waters or work?
That's a good question, and maybe that's something that we'll find out today. And I'm wondering about the geo programs too, and the NEPs, because I think there are some that are connected to all three of those programs, but I don't know. And my colleague Jeff is going to be on today too, who's more engaged in some of those, so he might be able to also field some questions that folks might have. So
great.
Yeah.
And that's Jeffrey Lerner, right?
Yep.
Richard. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. He's just joining. I think I saw he was added last night. Yep.
Yep. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, Shannon. How are you?
I'm doing well. Good to see you.
Yeah.
I love that map that you've got, Jeff.
Oh, thanks.
Hi, Melanie. How are you? Can you hear us okay?
Oh, my microphone's on. Yes, I can.
Okay, wonderful. I was like, it doesn't look like she's muted, but okay, great.
Oh. And Ryan, when Noah presents today, my colleague Janine is going to be sharing slides. Is there anything in our setup that is going to prevent her from doing that?
I don't think so. I just think you go to the share button, which is at the top, and you should just be able to share it from there. So, and I hope it works because I don't have anybody's presentations ahead of time, but that's okay. I was probably going to have you guys or Noah go third. So, all right.
Sounds good.
I'll get things kicked off here and I'll just let folks in as they join. But, thank you all. And I'm glad we're going to make this a little bit more of a diverse FHP call that we traditionally have monthly. And just to give like our federal agency folks a little bit of background, we have calls monthly for our fish habitat partnership coordinators. They coordinate the 20 fish habitat partnerships that are under the National Fish Habitat Partnership. So these partnerships and the coordinators are really the points on the ground in their own individual regions, working on, conservation types of efforts to protect, restore, and enhance fish habitat across the country. So it'd be really great. We're excited certainly to have presentations from the Interagency Task Force and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service here today. And as well as NOAA Fisheries, EPA, and BLM. So how we were going to, handle the call today was I was going to have all of these agencies give, 10 or 15 minute presentation. And then I was going to allow about 5 minutes for questions in between. I'm recording this webinar here today for folks to share afterwards. I know there were a couple of coordinators that could not make it, so we thought it'd be great to share that. And if there are slides available from today, just please share them with me afterwards, and we'll go from there. But thank you all for being participating today. So I think with that said, Alex, is there any other intros? I was just going to roll into having Shannon go, and really how I was going to, frame this up today is I was going to have Shannon go, then Sharmila from BLM, Melanie from NOAA, and then Richard and Jeffrey from EPA. Okay. Great. So Shannon, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ryan. Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Let me just get my screen shared. All right. Okay. And if everybody can see my slides, okay.
Yep.
Awesome. So hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Shannon Boyle. I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and headquarters in our Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program. And I kind of have served as the National Fish Passage Program Coordinator, although now, as of more recently, am coordinating the Interagency Fish Passage Task Force. Our program coordinator, as of a few months ago, is Amy Horstman, who you can reach out to, or me for any program-related questions and concerns. And for task force related things, you can reach out to me. So I'm going to touch on both of those today. And in the interest of time, I might speed through some of this. So if you have questions or anything, please don't hesitate to ask. So many of you maybe are probably already familiar with our National Fish Passage Program. It is a highly collaborative program that's been around since, for almost 20 years now. It's been kind of hugely successful. It's been responsible for reopening over 64,000 miles of stream and river habitat, works with an abundance of partners. It's removed over 3,500 barriers, and typically has quite a significant funding leveraged ratio. The program kind of is dispersed across the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services network, with national coordinators and leadership kind of at headquarters, at my level and Amy's level. We also rely on regional networks of the program, which are really kind of our front line for implementing the program. There's a regional coordinator in each of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service regions, of which there are 8. And then a lot of the work that happens on the ground is happening with fisheries and habitat biologists in collaboration with all of the partners and funding recipients. It also does work cross-programmatically, kind of intra-agency between the service programs, both with ecological services, the refuges, both on refuge land, as well as the partners for fish and wildlife habitat, for fish and wildlife and coastal programs within the service, and others in various ways. There are a network of several engineers within the service that work specifically on designing and reviewing designs for fish passage projects, and they are an integral part of the program. And then, of course, all of our funding recipients and partners for all of the projects that we implement with the program is also, a huge part of the National Fish Passage Program. Over the 20 years, Primarily, it's been operating via annual appropriations, which in 2023 was around $18 million. So this has typically been a smaller program, kind of works on an ongoing basis throughout the year, where projects are developed in collaboration with service biologists and our service regions. A lot of the kind of on-the-ground project decision-making is happening at the regional level, and projects are typically smaller in the $25,000 to $400,000 range. Because of a lot of the success of the program in 2021, the infrastructure law awarded the Fish Passage program $200 million, an additional $200 million over 5 years. And this is kind of, although under the umbrella and same priorities as our annual appropriated program, the BIL program is kind of operating separately from our base program. A lot of the scoring and selection happens at a more national level following regional input and review. And because the awarding amount, $200 million over 5 years, which is around $40 million a year, minus a few million for administrative and project management, we are targeting larger projects with our BIL funding, typically in the range of $250,000 to upwards of $10 million, with an average of an estimated $1 million, and there's some, estimation in that. With the BIL program, because it is a national, more national in scope, we are targeting national and administration priorities for connectivity restoration, environmental justice, and climate resilience. So there's slight differences, but at their core, they are seeking to remove barriers and restore fish habitat. For eligibility, a few key items here are it is a cooperative conservation program, but other than that, it is quite open in terms of eligible applicants and eligible entities for the funding. Any entity kind of more or less under the sun, including federal agencies, nonprofits, tribes, even for-profit entities in some cases, private landowners, et cetera, are eligible for funding under our program. The one caveat to that is it is a cooperative conservation program. So all of our projects funded under the National Fish Passage program really have to be kind of implemented in collaboration and in cooperation with service staff on the ground. In terms of eligible projects, we do work nationally in scope. We are not limited to the limits of anadromy or any specific habitats like coastal habitats or anything. Projects are eligible across the country in inland waterways and in coastal environments. And in general, projects that partially with preference on completely eliminate a barrier to fish and aquatic species that could include dams, culverts, inefficient fishways, even kind of environmental barriers like water quality or water quantity are eligible for funding under the Fish Passage program. Other activities that may be relevant to a project that do not include construction or on-the-ground implementation are also eligible. That includes planning and feasibility, engineering and design, in many cases, staff capacity, especially for disadvantaged or tribal recipients. Implementation, monitoring, and outreach are all eligible for funding under the program. One just quick caveat in terms of eligibility is it is a voluntary program. That means we do not fund projects for federal or state compensatory mitigation. If kind of fish passage is required by federal or state regulations, we will not fund that project. But that's pretty much almost the only caveat to eligibility. In terms of how we deliver funding, because of the cooperative nature of the program, we do primarily utilize cooperative agreements, although other funding mechanisms have been used in many cases, including grants, interagency agreements, intra-agency agreements, and others. So I'll focus primarily on our BIL program for today. We are entering into our 3rd year of the 5 years of BIL. We have delivered already, or in the process of delivering, I guess, our 2022 and 2023 funding. And this is just a little snapshot of what we have awarded already. In 2022, shortly after the BIL signing, we relied on our kind of extensive existing network of partners and a kind of running list within the service of shovel-ready projects to deliver $38 million. $2 million of the 40 was held back for administrative expenses within the service. To 40 projects across 23 states and Puerto Rico. When completed, our 2022 funding will remove 100 barriers and reopen 3,700 miles on estimate of stream and river habitat, and leveraged $34 million about in partner funding. In 2023, we held back the $2 million of administrative funding and a few extra million, $3 million or so for project management and staff capacity funding within the service to support our biologists and staff on the ground, to around a similar amount of projects, 39 projects across 22 states. And when completed, within these 2 years of funding, we'll remove almost 200 barriers and reopen almost 6,000 miles of habitat. So in terms of how the kind of funding process, funding cycle process works within Fish Passage BIL, this is kind of a rough sketch of how it operates. Because we rely heavily on the cooperative nature of our program, we really emphasize that funding applicants or project proponents reach out to FAC or NFHP staff immediately upon interest in a program, interest in seeking funding under Fish Passage BIL. And in general, the application process starts with a letter of interest, which does not necessarily guarantee an invitation to develop a full proposal, but projects are then kind of assessed by the regions and developed in collaboration with applicants at the field and regional level. There is then a period of time that all projects undergo a regional review and are submitted to headquarters after that regional review and selection. And then there's a national kind of technical review panel at the headquarters level, and final selection and approval rests with Fish and Wildlife Service and Department of Interior leadership. So in 2023, which is all I can speak to at this time, our 2024 funding announcement is not actually, has not been released yet, although we are planning to release it in the next few months, as soon as we can, we're trying to get it out as soon as possible. But our 2023 funding opportunity kind of provides a good context for what to focus on. We are not expecting very significant differences in specifically the selection criteria between 2023 and 2024. So, I think in the interest of time, I won't go into too much detail here, but for the most part, for our projects, we do aim to prioritize projects based on the benefits to the ecosystem that they're providing, including kind of permanence of the fish passage benefits and the context on a regional or landscape level scale, the benefits to the communities, including resiliency to climate change and benefits to disadvantaged and tribal communities. And then, a variety of funding and timeline considerations, including, support for the project on the communities at the community level, and kind of estimated project duration and timeline. So in terms of the timeline for application, from when we announce our funding opportunity to when awards are made, this is kind of a rough estimate of our timeline for Fish Passage BIL. We are expecting to release our 2024 NOFO this coming fall, with applications and proposals being developed and submitted throughout the winter, and then review happening kind of in late winter, early spring, with final projects anticipated in spring of 2024. Next thing I'll just touch on is just the collaborative effort that is kind of ongoing amongst all of these federal agencies right now that many of you have probably heard about in a variety of forums. If you weren't present for some of these engagement activities that we've been working on over the last year, the Federal Interagency Fish Passage Task Force kind of came out of a very collaborative, engaging process that was undertaken since June of 2022 and was officially established in December of 2022 by collective agreement of the leadership of 13 member agencies. It's continued to be and serve as kind of a coordinating body for strategically delivering BIL fish passage funding, of which there's an estimated $2 billion in the bill, with additional federal funding for fish passage in the IRA, not to mention kind of annual appropriations that can support the work. The real goal of the task force is to be truly kind of transformational and revolutionize the way that not only the federal government works together to achieve a common goal, but also the way that we all individually work with our stakeholders to implement funding on the ground and generally reduce the burden for both the agencies and partners. So in general, kind of as an overarching list of objectives, which may be an oversimplification, we really are trying to kind of maximize the impact on the ground by creating interagency and organizational efficiencies across the board, across all of these federal agencies and the way that we work together. In so doing, we hope to contribute to meaningful long-term policy changes that may help to reduce the building of new and future fish passage barriers, in addition to kind of removing current barriers to fish passage and fish habitat. We are trying to coordinate on national efforts to raise awareness about the problem of the problem at hand and the potential opportunity of this funding and future funding. We are doing really committing to an adaptive process where we are implementing the lessons that we learn and continuing to improve the way that we kind of integrate our lessons. And of course, as an overarching theme across all of this work, we are doing our best to ensure that the benefits provided by the task force and the objectives that we are tasked with provide meaningful benefits to tribes and disadvantaged communities. As of fairly recently, and that may be relevant to those of you who are seeking funding, if you haven't yet heard of it or seen it in other forums, we did release a fish passage portal, which will be continuously updated going forward. And it does, at the moment, has links to sites for all BIL fish passage funding across the federal government. It has agency points of contact for specific programs. It also has a few resources for practitioners of fish passage, including kind of training resources, the SARP barrier inventory, the National Barrier Inventory that SARP has been developing, as well as a few other resources that may be relevant to those of you who are seeking to initiate project development. So feel free to check this out. It's a useful resource. And if you have any feedback on it as well, we're more than happy to hear and integrate that feedback to make it more useful going forward. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip this slide, but just know that stakeholder engagement and coordination with our external partners is a huge component of the task force, and we are continuously trying to do our best in the way that we are working with you and incorporating your feedback as federal agencies. And lastly, for those of you, many of you were able to join us at our July Fish Passage workshop at NCTC last year. We are hoping to host a second iteration of this workshop to kind of share what the task force has achieved and continue the discussions on the opportunity. At this time, we are actually tentatively scheduled to overlap with the December NFHP board meeting in Charleston, South Carolina. This is tentatively scheduled at this time. It is not confirmed. We don't yet have a venue, but I'm very confident that we will find one. And once we're kind of further down that line, we'll be sending out save the dates and hope to engage with all of you more specifically at that workshop. So that's it. Feel free to reach out to me with questions. I'm happy to also take a few if we have time. And sorry, that was a little long, Ryan. a little bit too much to cover.
That was great, Shannon. Much appreciated. And I think we'll take time for maybe one or two questions. But I will say that since we'll just kind of have this archived, if folks want to put anything in the chat, feel free to do so. I know there was already some engagement in there. I think Joan asked for the actual website for the portal. I think Alex shared that. So, but yeah, we'll take a minute here for a quick question. Okay.
Thanks,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you. So I think we're going to go to BLM next, and Sharmila. Oh.
Hey everyone, my name is Sharmila Jepson and I work for the Bureau of Land Management with headquarters, and I'm located out of Western Oregon, but I work for the Denver office and I work as a lead fisheries biologist there. I'm going to go ahead and share a presentation. It's not as fancy as what Shannon had, but let me see if this works. I'm trying to share in Teams.
So you can just go up to the right-hand corner. Yeah, I think I'm seeing
Doing
it.
something.
Yep, I see it.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to quickly talk to you about the status and trend for the Bureau of Land Management when it comes to fish passage. And I just have a few slides to share and a little bit of information. So bear with me as I try to figure out how to navigate this. There we go. So we're talking about connectivity infrastructure here because the BLM does have a lot of infrastructure that needs some help. And here's an example of some of those type of infrastructure. So I'm going to talk about policies next that we have internal to the BLM. No, let's see here. So our internal policy is a draft manual that is being revised at this point. It's a 6720 manual and it is not ready for release, but I do want to share some information from it. We do have internal guidelines for inventory and human-made barriers and assess passage for riparian and wetland and aquatic species, and this helps people in the field figure out where they need to begin with fish passage issues. Another policy that we have is to protect and restore connectivity for aquatic organism passage between headwater tributaries and main stem channels and between streams and their floodplains and off-channel habitats and wetlands. And we also have identify priority habitat connectivity areas that are important for riparian, wetland, and aquatic species. Another set of policies that we have evaluate all proposed actions to determine if adverse impacts to habitat connectivity are likely to occur. So when it comes to NEPA, we carry out these types of determinations, in terms of effects to habitat connectivity. Barriers to connectivity should only be maintained or constructed if they're required for the protection and recovery of native species. We do maintain some barriers, to protect T&E species, so that's part of our policy also. The next point I wanted to make about was that we do have some standards and guidelines that we follow using our manual for bridges and major culverts and a handbook for bridges and culverts, and known as the inspection handbook. We also have training for stream simulation for aquatic organism passage structures that are hosted by the Forest Service, and we use these very commonly. Several BLM staff have attended these trainings in the past years and more recently, and Oregon Washington is setting up a specific training for stream simulation at a local session. And I see in the chat, please share the handbook. I can put it in there later. Yes. We do have a habitat connectivity instruction memorandum that is available on the BLM website. This instruction memorandum helps the Bureau, and this is I'm just reading from it, helps the Bureau of Land Management fulfill aspects of its multiple use and sustained yield mandate by ensuring habitats for native fish, wildlife, and plant populations are sufficiently interconnected. As part of that work, this policy directs the BLM state offices to consult with state fish and wildlife agencies and tribes to assess habitat connectivity in order to manage as best as possible for intact connected habitat. So this is a really big emphasis point for us that we are wanting to work more with our state fish and wildlife agencies and tribes to be able to improve habitat connectivity. Other policies, we have guidance from CEQ for federal departments and agencies on ecological connectivity and wildlife corridors, and this was issued on March 21st, 2023, and the BLM and other federal agencies have 180 days to complete a report on policies, actions, and performance measures for this. We are in the process of completing that for the BLM. So under BIL, I just want to emphasize that BLM did not receive funding specifically under Fish Passage for BIL funding. We do fund fish passage projects that have been allocated under Good Neighbor Authority funds under BIL. So in 2022, we funded $715,000 for fish passage projects under GNA, which is a Good Neighbor Authority, and also funded $1 million worth of fish passage projects in 2023 under the Good Neighbor Authority. So the third round of funding for fiscal year 2024 is coming up, and approximately $20 million are available for Good Neighbor Authority projects. We do expect the field and district offices, that is our field implementation level offices, to submit a few fish passage projects. We are competing with other projects as well. It's not just for fish passage. So, we're hoping to see some good aquatic restoration projects as well, which we feel goes along, with fish passage issues. Under IRA, I know we specifically want to talk about BIL, but just quickly touching on IRA, aquatic connectivity, it is integral to aquatic restoration work, as I mentioned, and we did make a grant funding opportunity, which was made available in March of 2023. And we're finalizing the awards, and those will also include an aquatic connectivity component to it. So the current status in BLM, for BLM culvert inventories and assessments, most of the BLM has inadequate culvert inventories and assessments. We really struggle with this. It's something that we really do need to work towards improving. I know that Western Oregon BLM is very proactive in supporting fish passage projects and have adequate fish passage inventories and assessments, and they're very, very good at raising money and getting a lot of these culverts replaced in Western Oregon. The trend in the BLM, we hope, is to increase fish passage inventories and assessments in the BLM, and the BLM operates in 12 Western states. And we hope to identify and prioritize fish passage across the 12 Western states. And we don't really have a timeline for this right now. Our partnerships that are going to help us get there is we keep working with SARP, and we use their assessment and prioritization protocols for consistent outcomes. We have a new agreement with South Dakota State University, which will follow SARP assessments and prioritization protocols for Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and Utah. We also have the BLM restoration landscapes, and I'll put a link into the chat for that also. And those are focal areas for aquatic connectivity as well. So we're looking to see where we can, really focus in on aquatic connectivity in some of these areas. We have a memorandum of agreement with other federal land management agencies to promote aquatic connectivity, which include National Park Service, United States Forest Service, United States Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Bureau of Land Management. And we also actively participate in the Federal Fish Passage Task Force that Shannon had mentioned just now. And we have signed the Fish Passage Task Force Charter also. And that's all I have. If you have any quick questions, just let me know. And I'll add some things in the chat for you.
Yeah, thank you, Sharmila. So we do have just a request for the handbook. We do have time for a quick question if anyone has one for Sharmila.
Looks like there's a hand up.
Yeah, Joan, is your hand up?
Yeah, I had. Thank you, Sharmila. That was really helpful. I wanted to know whether your handbook for stream simulation handbook, does it include different species such as passage for lamprey species?
Oh, that's a really good question. We don't have a handbook for stream simulation work. That is, we just use the Forest Service is really the agency that hosts that training. And I can, however, send you a link with some of the work that they have. And I believe they do have a handbook or a guidelines of, I think it's a guideline book that they have. So I can pass that on to you. I do believe they have some information about lampreys in there as well. So that would be well worth looking into. And I can also put you in touch with other folks that are really, who put on the training themselves, if you're interested.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Joan. And certainly we can share contacts, if that's necessary. Okay. Anyone else? All right, great. Well, we have Melanie Gange from NOAA Fisheries and Janine Harris. And I think, Melanie, you said Janine was going to be sharing, so she should have the ability to do that.
All right, thanks everybody. So what Janine and I are primarily here to do today is to talk about two funding opportunities that opened in the first week of August. They are specific to the topic of fish passage and furthermore in coastal ecosystems. So the passage of native migratory and sea-run fish in coastal ecosystems, including the Great Lakes. I will mention that we also had a third funding opportunity published just yesterday that is also focused on coastal ecosystems, but it is much broader in the types of restoration that it addresses, and we'll get a link to that in the chat as well. The links to these particular fish passage opportunities are in the presentation. All right, so the two competitions we're primarily focusing on today. First of all, our National Fish Passage Funding Opportunity, where we anticipate up to $175 million of funding available, closes on October 16th. And then a Tribal Fish Passage Funding Opportunity that is open until November 8th. And we can provide assistance to our applicants to help them best understand which funding opportunities are most appropriate for their projects. We do want to emphasize that Indian tribes, including Alaska Native corporations, are eligible to apply to both of these funding opportunities. Also, organizations that represent tribes through formal legal agreements are eligible for our tribal fish passage competition as well. Let's see. Janine, I think I probably didn't cover, I probably just didn't cover everything I wanted to say, just minimum and maximum funding opportunities. So our National Fish Passage opportunity does have a higher maximum request that's up to $20 million. And our tribal opportunity has a maximum request of up to $12 million. Yeah, one more slide. Sorry, they set up these templates for us and we don't know which way they're going. There we go.
Okay, there you go.
And just to emphasize, for some folks, a maximum or a minimum request of $1 million or even $300,000 seems like more than they want to take on. We just want to point out that that minimum request is across the entire award period. So if you are proposing a 3-year award period, then for a tribal funding opportunity, you're only proposing to spend, you could be proposing to spend less than $300,000 in that first year. Okay, we can move on, Janine. All right, so the program objectives here for both competitions are to support fish passage for native, migratory, and sea-run fish, again, emphasizing those coastal ecosystems and the Great Lakes. For the tribal priority opportunity, in addition, we really are looking at increasing tribal capacity to participate in fish passage barrier removal efforts. So funding is to be used for fish passage that rebuilds fisheries, contributes to the conservation of endangered species, and overall enhances watershed health. So that's just a snapshot. This is a very brief version of an hour-long presentation that we're offering to applicants. And there's contact information at the end of the slides if you're interested in participating in those full webinars where we really go into detail about these two opportunities. Next slide, Janine. So just to get everybody on the same page, we do define native, migratory, and sea-run fish because these are our target fish species under this funding opportunity. We are looking for those native species that spend a portion of their lives in rivers and or ponds and a portion in the oceans, estuaries, or Great Lakes. So this could be salmon, steelhead trout, shad, river herring, American eel, sturgeon, among others. So these are the fish that we're looking at focusing on in this opportunity. And just to emphasize what we mean by in-stream barriers, since that is the other real focus of this funding opportunity, an in-stream barrier is any blockage that prevents or reduces the ability of migratory fish to move where they need to survive and complete their life cycles. And so our funding opportunities are going to focus on physical barriers such as dams and culverts. Janine, I did move to the talking points on the next slide, unless it advanced on your end and just not on mine. My team shut down earlier in our presentation today, so could be on my side. We know sometimes that fish passage barriers are environmental barriers, such as excess sediment or poor water quality or temperature and flow variations. This opportunity is focusing on physical barriers, but those other environmental barriers could be addressed in concert with a physical barrier. And we do expect that barriers might be permanent or temporary for one or more life stages of fish. All right, and maybe just one last definition here of fish passage. So this is defined as the ability of fish to move freely between the habitats they rely on for food, growth, reproduction, and other needs. And we are in this opportunity focusing on native and sea-run fish moving through the barrier site under their own power at multiple life stages, generally known as volitional passage. Now, we may have, or you may also have, partners who are interested in applying for projects that fall slightly outside of this definition of passage, such as projects that involve transporting fish around a barrier. We do want to emphasize that those projects are eligible to apply. However, there are some evaluation criteria that they may not score as well on based on some of the evaluation criteria. And so if people are interested in proposing some of these projects that transport fish around a barrier, to check in with the competition managers, either myself or Janine Harris, so that we can kind of talk with you about how to really emphasize the strengths of the proposal in your application process. And then we also just wanted to emphasize this definition of meaningful engagement, which refers to communities having an opportunity to be an integral part of the visioning, decision-making, and leadership for activities that affect their environment and health or well-being. We're looking for proposals in both of these opportunities that meaningfully engage tribes and or underserved communities. All right, in addition to this, some of what I've talked about program objectives here, just to point out the species that we're emphasizing in this competition. And these are in no particular order, but some of the highest scoring proposals are going to show connections to how they will recover threatened or endangered species listed under the Endangered Species Act. They'll show how they might sustain or help rebuild fish stocks managed under the Magnuson-Stevens Fisheries Conservation and Management Act, or they'll have benefits to Great Lakes native species, or they'll show their benefits to enhancing the sustainability of saltwater recreational fisheries. And NOAA does have a National Saltwater Recreational Fisheries Policy and Implementations Plan that you can refer. And the link on this slide will help you dive in and ensure that when you put your proposal together, you're really, discussing your target species of interest to NOAA. In addition to some fish species, we have some other areas of emphasis, and these are that we're looking for projects that will enhance community resilience, including providing resilience to extreme weather and climate hazards. We're looking for projects that provide benefits to tribal and underserved communities. We're encouraging projects that support hydroelectric license surrender and that remove dams that are no longer economically viable. And on the next slide is also a link to additional resources that can, one more back. Yeah, the additional resources that will help you think through the topics of resilience, et cetera.
Sorry, Melanie, let me reset it again.
Yeah, no worries.
This slide.
Yeah, and again, these slides are available on our website. Again, this is just a short portion of a much longer presentation geared at competition applicants. All right, so moving forward to project types, sometimes this is a little bit easier to kind of sink your teeth into. We are looking for projects that could involve development and feasibility studies, engineering and design, on the ground fish passage restoration, pre and post removal implementation monitoring, stakeholder engagement, education and outreach, and opportunities to build the capacity of new and existing restoration partners. Again, there's an emphasis here on including implementation monitoring. We are not including effectiveness monitoring in these competitions, with the exception of effectiveness monitoring that contributes to tribal capacity building. And so that's eligible within the tribal fish passage competition. All right, we did want to just point out some differences in applicant eligibility between the two competitions. So national fish passage, basically most organization types are going to be eligible. For the tribal competition, our eligible applicants are Indian tribes, meaning US federally recognized tribes and Alaska Native corporations, as described in the Indian Self-Determination Act, and then also organizations that represent Indian tribes through formal legal agreements. These could be commissions, consortia, or tribal conservation districts, for example. All right, and if you've got questions about eligibility, please do just check in with Janine to ensure that the organization who's planning on applying for the tribal fish passage competition is an eligible organization. We wanted to emphasize that there are just a couple of completely ineligible activities. So first of all, any activities that are required by local, state, or federal consent decree, court order, FERC exemption or license condition, basically anything that's currently legally required is not an eligible activity. For the National Fish Passage Competition, as I just mentioned, we are not considering effectiveness monitoring and research under this competition, as much as we do find it valuable and helpful overall. We're not including funds in this solicitation for that because it is a longer term activity than implementation monitoring, and it does require detailed field investigations, for instance, of physical, biological, and geochemical processes that just don't fit well within the time frame of a restoration project. Effectiveness monitoring that contributes to tribal capacity building may be considered eligible for the tribal fish passage competition. All right, and that's it for us. We have one final slide with all of our contact information on it. The shortest link that we have available for you is that one in the top corner, that noaa.gov/infrastructure-law. And if you follow that link, you will find all of NOAA's open opportunities for the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act. So you won't just see these two, you'll see the third one that published just yesterday, as well as some open opportunities out of the National Ocean Service as well. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie and Janine. And always fun trying to operate Google templates on Teams, maybe we're troubleshooting some stuff for Microsoft. I don't know. But thank you. We have time for a quick question, if anyone has one.
Yeah, and thanks to Alex for putting the links into the chat. We do have 2 more webinars, Janine. We did the first 2, so we have 2 more public webinars coming up if people really want to dive into these opportunities and how to apply. And there's also a recorded webinar if the timing of those, the ones listed on the website, don't work for you.
Yeah, we'll have a tribally focused webinar next Thursday, and next Tuesday is our last just broad webinar for all applicants.
Okay, thank you. All right, and next we will bounce to EPA. We have Jeff Lerner and Richard Mitchell. So I'll turn it over to you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks.
And yeah, so I'm Richard Mitchell, and I'm with EPA's Office of Water. And Jeff is a colleague of mine in the Office of Water, and I'll let him. So I'm within the monitoring and assessment branch, and Jeff, you're with, well, I guess you're on detail now.
Yeah, so I'm connected to the immediate Office of Wetlands, Oceans, and Watersheds, which is the larger office that Richard belongs to as well. So we are in the same office together, but I'm currently on detail managing partnership programs with the Chesapeake Bay program, which is one of our large geographic programs, involves a lot of partnerships. I'll talk about that a little bit as part of the presentation, but it's good to be here.
Yep. So I'll go ahead and share the presentation. And as Jeff mentioned, this is not the screen I was thinking was going to come up on, but that's okay. But yeah, so I will give the presentation and then Jeff can elaborate on certain topics, and that, given the time constraint, you can also reach out to Jeff and I if you have any questions about what we're going to present during today's presentation. There is quite a bit of information. There. Okay. Everyone sees just the slide now. Is that correct?
Yep, see it great.
Okay. So just to give you an overview of EPA's mission and authority with regard to water quality and the Clean Water Act. So our main purpose is to maintain water quality across the nation, and the implementation of the Clean Water Act, which includes the support of living resources, obviously fisheries, other aquatic organisms, and so forth. The key activities under the Clean Water Act include grants to states and other partnership programs, also technical assistance, and a forum for coordination of activities at watershed scale level. So a number of the programs I'm going to talk about today are based on a watershed dynamic or structure, but that's how EPA really works on the ground with a lot of different organizations, both state, federal, tribal, and even NGOs. Those programs that are covered under those different programs or grants and funding activities include our EPA place-based programs, which include 12 geographic programs. We call them the EPA GEO program. As Jeff mentioned, Chesapeake Bay is one of those. We have a Great Lakes program, Puget Sound, and so forth. And I'll show a map later of the geographic distribution of those programs. In addition to those programs, we also have 28 national estuary programs, which are scattered around the country. And I'll also give an overview of them as well. In addition to those geo-based programs, EPA supports state programs through the non-point source program, which is covered under the Clean Water Act Section 319 program. In addition to that, and a program that a lot of people don't think about in terms of watershed restoration or watershed protection, or even potentially fish passage or habitat restoration activities is actually the State Revolving Fund program. This is a very large program within EPA. It's actually within the office, drinking water office. But that program does actually do a lot of work at the watershed scale to ensure healthy watersheds for clean source water protection areas and so forth. So that's actually a source of funding that I'll talk about briefly that could also benefit a number of the programs here. EPA has a number of tools and monitoring efforts in place already that have a focus on watershed protection, but also aquatic resource assessments and so forth. So we have the National Aquatic Resource Surveys, the Healthy Watershed Assessment Program, and then finally the Recovery Potential Screening Tool, which is a tool that allows practitioners to utilize it to help them understand various watersheds that they may be interested in doing work in, which ones may be more beneficial or benefit from restoration efforts. So under the BIL Act, EPA did not receive specific new authority for fish passage or habitat restoration fisheries activities. However, under existing programs, EPA does have the flexibility to support fish passage and other fish habitat activities. So under the BIL fund, the National Estuary Program, the NEPs, received an additional $132 million of support beyond its normal annual funding. The geographic programs that I mentioned received an additional $1.7 billion in additional funding, and the state revolving funds received an additional $48 billion. And so while all of that funding won't and will not likely obviously be used for fish passage or fishery habitat or fish habitat restoration, a fair amount could be used in partnership with different federal, state, and local organizations. One thing I do want to point out, the non-point source program, the Section 319 program, did not receive new BIL funds, but does still, on average, receive about $200 million a year in funding. To give you an idea on previous activities of where funding has been involved in fish passage removal or dam removal, fish passage projects, and the various programs, EPA's and National Non-Point Source Program, the 319 program, has been involved in 47 dam removals since 2012, where $7.8 million has been leveraged $19 million of dam removal projects, and they've been occurred all over the country. In addition to that, many existing EPA partnerships already are working on fish passage activities. The NEP, so those partnerships have worked on over 365 fish passage projects since 2006. And in that case, they've used $2.7 million to help leverage $885 million total for these activities. And then the GEO programs are typically a much larger partnership between states, federal agencies, and NGOs and tribes on the ground. The way EPA looks at this is that for us, partnership is key and collaboration is key to ensure that we can improve upon fish passage issues as well as fish habitat issues across the country, and also allows us to build those partnerships and between the federal, state, and local organizations to ensure that with the funding that we do have in our GEO programs, our large place-based programs, we can hopefully do more with everyone's smaller amounts. So we can kind of come together to do bigger activities. Just want to give you an idea of the distribution of the different programs for the place-based programs. So the National Estuary Programs, I mentioned there's 28 of those. And they are spread around, as you would think, the coastal areas of the U.S. They're on all three coasts, the Pacific, Atlantic, and Gulf coasts. Something that's changed over the years is for a long time, a lot of these organizations were really focused on the coastal areas of these estuaries, but in more recent years, they've been moving more into the watersheds. So they've been doing more activities within their watersheds to improve watershed condition, water quality, fish passage, and so forth. In addition to that, I mentioned we had 12 place-based programs, the GEO programs. They range from the smallest being the Lake Champlain program all the way up to the Gulf of Mexico program. So as you can see, based on these geographic programs, EPA is covering a pretty large, if not almost all of the US with these different programs. So even like, for example, the Gulf of Mexico program, we think, well, they're focused on coastal or the Gulf itself. Reality is they're doing activities throughout the entire watershed. They're not just focused on the coastal areas. So there are potential opportunities throughout these watersheds. To give some idea or examples of previous funding, but also an example of potential funding moving forward using BIL funds. The National Estuary Program, as I mentioned, is looked at 364 to 365 projects to reconnect approximately 1,800 river miles for fish passage since 2006. And then, as I mentioned, using EPA's Section 320 funds, they've used $2.7 million to help leverage the $886 million for these projects. So that's an area where a smaller amount helps move larger amounts forward for larger projects. In addition to that, as I mentioned, there are some ongoing efforts to start using the BIL funds on fish passage issues. So one example in EPA's Region 3, they're looking at migratory fish passage designs for dams on the tributary within the Delaware Inland Bays National Estuary Program. So within that NEP, they're looking at coming up with some new designs to help with fish passage. And they're planning on using BIL funds for that activity in partnership with the state of Delaware's Natural Resource and Environmental Control Agency. So that's just one example where EPA is trying to use some of the funds. And Jeff may speak to this more, but previous activities within the Chesapeake Bay through the Chesapeake Bay program, since 1988, the organization has helped open over 32,000 miles of stream. So that's one area where I think continued work could be ongoing with BIL funds as well as existing funds that are already in place. And then one of the geospatial or the GEO programs, the Great Lakes GLRI effort, provides anywhere from 3.2 to 9 million annually to Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, Army Corps, and Bureau of Indian Affairs to implement projects across the basins of the Great Lakes to improve aquatic connectivity. This has focused on both, small dam removal, but also road crossing, culvert crossing improvements. And so since 2010, approximately 6,700 miles of streams have been reconnected. And then, as I mentioned earlier, a program that a lot of people don't think about in terms of fish passage and fish habitat restoration and so forth, the EPA State Revolving Funds Program through EPA's Region 10 has funded multiple fish passage projects through the Drinking Water Providers Partnership. And so a lot of this is focused on source water protection areas, and some of these watersheds are very large. And so what these activities are planning to do and have done before, but are also planning to do with BIL funds coming up, is to improve or either improve or replace culverts at many locations throughout the watershed. And this is a situation where EPA is looking at it from a drinking water quality, a clean water, water quality issue, but also biological health condition issues and so forth. So it's got multiple outcomes from this effort. And so that's, again, how EPA sees these activities that they're funding with these multiple partners, trying to develop a situation where we get more out of individual efforts. So individual efforts coming together, bringing the funds together, and providing essentially a linchpin in a given area to help organize these groups together. And then finally, I just want to mention a few priorities related to fisheries that EPA has. So as I mentioned earlier, EPA's National Aquatic Resource Surveys is collecting fish assemblage and fish tissue data on an ongoing basis through the National Rivers and Streams Assessment, the National Coastal and National Lakes Assessment. And that's something that is really important to our state partners, the Department of, many of the departments of environmental quality that work with us. But as I also mentioned, watershed protection and restoration programs, that's a key area that EPA is focused on and has been focused on for many years through the Clean Water Act Section 319, but also the National Estuaries Program and the GEO programs. And then additionally, I know I'm kind of running out of time here. EPA is heavily involved in water quality standards programs to help states and tribes and territories improve or develop their own standards to help protect fisheries and recreational use of waters as well as drinking water sources. And then, I'll just real quickly mention at the bottom here, our Office of Research and Development has a number of different areas that it's focused on in terms of fisheries issues, ranging from technical support for National Aquatic Resource Surveys, but also developing models for different reasons, stress response related to fish populations, as well as to watershed scenario development for different water quality issues and having fish as endpoints for those modeling efforts. So with that, I will leave it there. And if anyone has any questions. And Jeff, if you have anything else you'd like to add real quick. Oh, you're on mute.
Yep. Thanks, Richard. And I know we're really short on time. I just wanted to maybe wrap up by saying at EPA, we care about fish because the Clean Water Act directs us toward fishable, swimmable ecosystems. And we also care about, as Richard said, the integrity of watersheds. And I think it's fair to say that because non-point source pollution is now really the remaining largest source of pollution for water out there, I don't see that going away as an issue. So I anticipate us continuing to want to work on creative solutions for non-point source pollution, which could involve fish projects, et cetera. I think an advantage of some of that watershed planning is that it gives you a structure around which you can build watershed-wide goals for fish passage and fish habitat. We've done that with the Chesapeake Bay program. That was, I think, part of how we were able to get to the goals that we set for ourselves and were able to achieve. And we couldn't have done it without other agencies. And so NOAA played a major role in the fish passage work for the Chesapeake Bay program. And I know that within Great Lakes and Puget Sound, we work with other federal agencies as well. As Richard indicated, many of EPA's funding opportunities are really actually not directly from EPA, but are through our partners, which include states like the non-point source programs or the SRF programs, which are managed by the state agencies that are our partners. But we do want to encourage you to think about how fish passage and habitat work can be connected to water resources and water resource agencies, which are often not the same as fish and wildlife agencies, which may be, who you're typically working with. So that may open up some new opportunities. I also just wanted to mention we have made some investments in healthy watersheds, and some of the grants that we've made in past years have included things like fish survey work, which has resulted in more protection of stream miles. We made an investment. We gave some money to Alaska Fish and Game through our Healthy Watersheds Consortium grants. We gave a grant to Trout Unlimited to work in Pennsylvania. Both of those grants that we made, which were pretty modest in size, actually resulted in fish surveys that resulted in using state policy to help further the protection of hundreds or thousands of miles of habitat and streams for salmonids and the trout streams in Pennsylvania. And then the SRFs, again, just to emphasize that, SRFs I think are a huge opportunity. I would say Ohio right now is one of the most sophisticated state SRF programs that is using its dollars to support dam removals, fish passage projects, et cetera. They spend about $15 million a year from their SRF on water quality related projects. And that's about 4 or 5 times the amount of money that we're able to give the state through the non-point source program. So the SRFs are really big. And so then just to wrap up, while we do not have BIL funding specifically for fish passage, just like BLM, we did receive $50 billion of BIL funding for water and water infrastructure in general. And we are participating in the interagency work group that Shannon mentioned. And I just want to say thank you to Fish and Wildlife Service and to the partnership with those other agencies for standing that up and putting that together. It's been a great process, and I just want to say thanks for that. That's all I have.
Well, thank you, Jeff and Richard, and this was great. We certainly didn't lose anybody on the call, so I think everybody was able to hang on there. I guess, I'll just entertain if folks have a question or two. We could leave that open, and then, obviously, we did record this, so we will share that out with our partners. We do have all your contact information, so we could share that out. But I'll pause for a second to see if anyone has any questions. Okay, well, thank you to all of our presenters. Oh, I think we have a question from Joan.
I'm always late on the mark. This question is more for NOAA folks, for Melanie. For the fish passage funding, the $1 million minimum ask is, it's so for some of our project sponsors who apply for National Fish Habitat Partnership funding, a lot of times $1 million is their projects don't cost $1 million. So I guess the thing that I'm wondering is, are you open to, say, a Fish Habitat Partnership working with its sponsors to bundle some projects that would reach that minimum amount, and then we would manage that funding?
This is Janine. I think Melanie had to leave the call. So
okay.
Yes, yeah, we realize that for some that is a high level. So projects can definitely be bundled. The fish passage competition, eligibility is pretty broad. So if a partnership was applying for the funds and bundled them, or the partner itself bundled some projects, there is a lot of flexibility there. So that is possible. So just have them, reach out to Melanie through the contact she had, and they can definitely talk about their projects and how they're looking at bundling. They will be evaluated on how much they relate to each other, the projects being having the same goals, being in the same watershed potentially. There has to be that kind of connection between what's being bundled, and they could be looking at the evaluation criteria to make sure they're providing like a strong application if they're trying to combine some projects. If that makes sense.
Thank you.
Oh, Melanie is. Oh, here. Okay. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, that's Melanie's email. And there's also an email for the competition, but either one works, to Melanie direct or in the competition on the website.
Thank you, Janine. Yeah, I did note that she jumped off. So great. Thanks for covering that. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all for participating today. I thought this was a great conversation, and much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you guys for organizing. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, everybody.